This is serious. Scores of jihadi brides, including some from the UK's biggest female terror cell, want to come back to Britain, according to reports. That's despite Whitehall officials warning that these women are as big a security threat as jihadi men. It would be lunacy to allow these women back. Their murdering husbands, and even some of them, were involved in some of the worst violence. The kind of violence that saw women and children being raped and then buried alive, men being beheaded and burned in cages. And even if some of these women weren't directly involved, the act of marrying a terrorist means they were complicit. So no, they shouldn't be allowed back here, particularly when government sources say it will be virtually impossible to prosecute any of them. These women can't pretend that they didn't know what they were getting into when they joined the mass murdering cult that is ISIS. And even if they left as naive-ish teenagers, they aren't anymore. They're radicalised and they're dangerous, which is why the British people should not have to have them back or pay a penny towards trying to turn them into decent human beings, because that ship has sailed.
So, I have every sympathy for the way in which you describe these women, and I think they are dangerous. I think they are beyond the pale. They are extremists would be too polite a word to describe them. They voluntarily went to join the worst terrorist group in our living memory and married people that are serious criminals, or were, if they're still alive. The concerns I have, Carole, with your recommended solution to the problem are twofold. One is I recoil every time I hear anything that sounds to my ears like we, Britain as a country, dumping our toxic waste, and they are toxic waste, on other countries and expecting them to be able to deal with it. What ends up happening instead is they end up in ungoverned zones and areas, like, for example, parts of northern Nigeria or in Somalia or Yemen or in Chechnya and other areas where there's conflict, Afghanistan, and they end up becoming potent and hardened and trained fighters and causes problems down the line. The second concern I have...
do that here, of course.
Yeah, that's bringing the second concern in, is that legally, and I often think of these things legally because of precedents they set, when you start stripping nationalities and stripping citizenship from people that clearly nobody likes, including me, you end up setting legal precedents, and it becomes bigger than the person that you're stripping them from. And you end up, those legal precedents end up getting used in other cases in a form of mission creep. So when, for example, we had an extradition treaty with the United States of America that they didn't ratify, that we did, it obliged us to send over anybody alleged to have committed a terrorist offence by the Americans, even without seeing evidence.
They're very likely, everyone has said, Whitehall, the security services said, there's no way we're going to be able to gather evidence and prosecute any of them. So what happens is they come back here, they get to walk back into the lives they had before. And Richard Barrett, who was the head of MI6 for global terrorism, he said quite clearly, people who have been in Iraq and Syria are still committed to let me finish. You've just had a big long stretch there. You've just had a big long stretch there. So MI5 now are monitoring 3,000 terrorists, and they're struggling with the resources we have to do that. So we're going to give them 80 more are due imminently, and probably another 20 or 30 before Christmas.
It's a catch-22.
Where would you send?
Do you know, I don't care. Do you know the thing is, Greg, I don't care what happens to them.
But you saying I don't care...
I don't care.
...is the reason why you shouldn't run anything.
No, it's not. It's not my job.
It is, exactly.
It's not my job.
It's not your job, I just don't want...
But the British government doesn't know what to do with
No, if you're in government, it is your job, and that's the problem.
That's the problem.
And we all understand what you're saying, but the problem is, what do you do with them? Where do they go?
This is always the question people... I'm not a politician, but the people who are there to decide that actually don't know what to do with them, because what they're going to do is let them back in, probably with their kids, hang on, some of whom have been radicalised. France are doing the sensible thing. They're letting the kids in, but none of the parents, which makes sense to me, because at least those kids have a chance then to be de-radicalised.
Carole, well, number one, we're not France, thank goodness. And what I would say is...
So you think it's a good thing to let these women back?
Let me finish. I get your point. I totally get your point, just as Majid said. But
so
the problem is, it's unenforceable. They are British citizens. So what are we going to do?
We have a way to revoke their citizenship.
And actually, there's a way to utilise them for information gathering.
June.
What I'm saying is, if we have no choice but to let the people in. The question, the conversation we should be having instead is, what do we do with them once they're here? You're not even looking at that. Because that is the conversation we should be having. What do we do with them once they get here?
Overturn the apple cart and not offer any solutions. And someone, because we debated this, and I wonder what the pledges make of this idea. When we talked about this on the radio station that you were on, Majid, somebody phoned in and said there's a European country where they are pursuing the idea that, although they might be citizens, say British citizens, if they are abstraction of Iraqi or Pakistani, or in my case Switzerland, if they can find out that your mum or your dad or even your grandparents were born, then you're going to be shipped back there if you are deemed to be a terror suspect. So we renounce everything. You have a Pakistani or a Swiss grandfather or whatever it might be, an Iraqi father. I'm just saying it is an idea. So that's where you're going.
But why would those countries take them?
I agree. There's no reason on earth why they should take them. But why should we take them? Which is, I agree with Carole there.
So I tell you why we should take them.
Because they're British.
Because most of these jihadi brides are converts or born and raised here they're British, and their radicalisation happened on our watch, not on Pakistan's watch, not on whichever country, right? And so those countries are going to say to us, well, hang on a minute, you're dumping it out. Hold on, last thing I'll say, because obviously I've been following this for many years, and the last thing I'll say on this is that if you try, let's take Pakistan, right? We try and send these guys back to Pakistan, say the 7/7 bomber, right?
Okay, sure.
And imagine he didn't die, and we're trying to send him back to Pakistan. Pakistan can rightfully say to us, hold on, we had years of the Afghan war where the Soviets invaded Afghanistan, and we had a whole bunch of these foreign fighters that no state wanted back, especially Saudi Arabia. Look what they ended up doing. They ended up going to Iraq and Syria and creating ISIS.
But you must have concerns one could be living next door to you or your children when they get older.
And also, if they come back here, they're already, these women have been talked to. These women have been talked to in Syria, and already they're denying any involvement in any terrorist activity. They're lying, as of course they would. And you just said before, they're British citizens. The law here, there is a law that allows us to strip the citizenship of someone whose, quote, presence in this country is not conducive to the public good. I would say the presence of these women in this country is not conducive to the public good.
Where do they go?
Well, they're stuck in Syria, I assume, are they?
Well, let them stay in Syria.
Stuck in northern Syria.
Let them stay in Syria with the Kurds. That's where they've been living for the past 5 years.
They're imprisoned by the Kurds who don't want them.
But we don't have the resources either.
And the Kurds don't even have a state. You know, the poor Kurds are expected to defeat ISIS and then deal with the prisoners of ISIS after they've defeated them.
But as Majid said, they are our toxic waste. Yeah. We have to figure out what to do with them.
Well, we should figure out, but it shouldn't be to let them to come back here, because as we can't prosecute
them,
it
was reversed.
It means they go back
into normal life. Imagine a Saudi terrorist was in this country and did something, and we tried to deport them to Saudi Arabia, and the Saudis said, we stripped him of his citizenship, we don't want him, thanks.
Yeah,
imagine how we'd feel.
Let's say what the Foreign Office says, because it's quite important. The Foreign Office says the following: the UK advises against all travel to Syria, as all UK consular services are suspended in Syria. It's extremely difficult to confirm the whereabouts and status of British nationals there. Anyone who does travel to Syria for whatever reason is putting themselves in considerable danger. And Greg, you're right. I only floated the idea that came on the radio show. The trouble is, we discover that one of them is of Swiss origin, to use my dad. Switzerland just going to say, no, thank you, he's not coming to Geneva, aren't they?
I mean, why would the Swiss in any way be willing to...
No, that's just never going to happen.
And they might accept you.
Well, they've got enough problems, apparently. Their economy's stalled. They don't need me.
But they should be put in, even when they get back here, they should be put in detention centres until they can be questioned.
But I bet they won't be. That's a different conversation.
That's a solution.
And that's what you should be looking at.
Then if we find out they're involved, then we strip them of their citizenship. Tell them to go wherever then. But we should not be paying for terrorists, for people who have done what I described in my intro. You bury women and children alive, you rape them, you behead people. We shouldn't allow them to come back here and live a normal life.
All right, it's time to draw a veil over the subject of jihadi brides. You're watching The Pledge on Sky News, and it's me up next. Excellent.